Hello and welcome to Energy Frontiers. I am Justina Okechukwu with this week's edition of the show, proudly supported by the African Energy Chamber. As always, we begin with some of the biggest energy news on the African continent and around the world. An oilfield services provider known as Petrofac has secured a $350 million 5-year technical services contract from GPetrol, the national oil company of Equatorial Guinea, in order to support the operations from its offshore Block B assets. In Egypt, United Oil and Gas plc says it has received a $1 million payment from the country's General Petroleum Corporation, placing the oil firm in a debt-free position to settle its outstanding debts and finalize withdrawal from the Abu Sinan concession program. Norwegian renewable energy company Scatec has set in motion the 540 megawatt Kenhardt solar farm in the northern Cape of South Africa, looking to strengthen the country's pathway to energy security and battle against the ongoing load shedding crisis in Africa's most advanced economy. Canadian oil and gas company Reconnaissance Energy Africa has announced plans to commence drilling its first Nangopo exploration well in June at the Namibia Damara Fold Belt. The well is targeting 163 million barrels of unrisked prospective oil resources, or 843 billion cubic feet of unrisked prospective natural gas resources. Now, oil prices climbed more than 3% on Friday after Israel carried out a strike on Iran, triggering fears of an expanding war in the Middle East. Global benchmark Brent crude traded 1.73% higher at $88.62 a barrel after topping $90 earlier, while the U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 1.75% to $84.01 per barrel. And that's the summary of your energy news headlines. When Energy Frontiers returns, we head to Washington, D.C., where the World Bank IMF Spring Meeting drilled down on the need to improve energy access in Africa. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, this week's 2024 spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank includes a series of panel discussions that's focused on how to scale up solutions and investments that will help connect additional millions of Africans to electricity and transform the continent's economies. Now, the president of the World Bank Group, Ajay Banga, and the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, both announced at the panel session a new partnership that would provide at least 300 million people in Africa with access to electricity by the year 2030.
I think electricity is a human right. I think electricity is the basis by which people can get access to health, people can get access to education, people can get access to the ability to innovate and manufacture and build productivity. If you don't have education, you don't have health, you don't have productivity, you don't have jobs, there is no solution to poverty and growth and development. And so to me, getting electricity to people is mission 1, 2, and 3. Back in COP28, the World Bank made a commitment to connect 100 million Africans to affordable energy by 2030, so 6 years or so. What we are doing today is multiplying that commitment by bringing in all parts of the bank across all parts of Africa and really thinking how we can make this work. We're going to multiply that commitment to 250 million people out of that 600. Akin is already ready to go to 50, but Akin is a guy who dreams big. So his head is going beyond the 50, but he's starting with the 50. Just let's take that 50 for a minute. Let's keep us where we are today. 250, 50, yep. 300 million. If we can reach 300 out of 600 by 2030, That's great stuff. That's the kind of commitment we need to make. But that's going to take effort from across all parts of the bank. It'll also take efforts in terms of financing. It'll take efforts in terms of working with governments. It'll take efforts in terms of working with the private sector. And, we'll talk about that. But to me, this is the big number. 250 million and 50 million, 300 million on the table, 2030, affordable access to energy. So we're going to need three things. We're going to need money, financing. Our estimate in the World Bank alone for the 250 million is you're going to take more than $35 billion to make this happen. And that's going to take money from IDA, which is our lending arm for the nations most in need, grants and concessional financing. That's the one that's coming up for replenishment at the end of this year. If we do sort of make this happen, a large part of that commitment will go from IDA into this one sector of getting energy into Africa. The second part is it's going to take the private sector, because you can't do this without them being involved. But to get the private sector involved, first, you're going to have to get governments to get their head in the game. And what do I mean by that? Again, something we talked about. You need utilities to be capable of paying the generators. You need utilities to have tariffs and policies that make them capable of being liquid and profitable enough. I don't mean that you should raise tariffs on the poorest in society. Right. We both believe in social safety nets, and we fund them. But it's beyond that. It is pay the right amount for what you can pay. And I think Nigeria, I don't know if my friend from Nigeria is in the audience, but he's a Nigerian, he knows this. They're currently going through an enormous correction. They have to manage it well for the poorest sections of society to not be as impacted as the others. But they're doing it to make their utilities capable. We need regulatory certainty and tariff policy clarity and good management teams running utilities and transmission lines, because that's what makes the rest of it possible.
Energy is like blood inside of your body, right? You got blood, you live. Economies thrive on energy, right? It's a direct correlation between the GDP growth you're going to have with the amount of energy you are able to develop, to generate. Whether it's you're going to power your industries, you're going to make sure you're competitive. So no economy can grow in the dark. No economy can industrialize in the dark.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and no economy can be competitive in the dark.
Sure.
And so Africa is pretty much, in my view, tired of being in the dark. I'm sitting next to RJ, my friend, and I'm saying they're asking us to think big, bolder, and better. And so to be able to do that, I couldn't be asking for a better partnership than with RJ right here in the World Bank. What we're saying is we at the African Development Bank will make sure that we are able to provide 50 million access by 2030. Okay. But in addition to that, we have to also harness the significant amount of renewable energy potential we have. Look, God is good to us. We've got a free sun. The sun is free, right? And we have 11 terawatts of that in Africa, right? We're using 1% of that. We got 250 gigawatts of hydro. We're using only probably 7% of that. We've got geothermal. We've got all the wind power, 115 gigawatts. We're using only 2% of it.
Sure.
So which means that we need a multi-stakeholder consultation process to have the roadmap to get there. And that's why Ajay and I agreed that we are going to have this year, together with the Africa Union, the Africa Energy Summit.
Yeah.
And that Africa Energy Summit will bring together the government, the private sector, the multilateral development banks, the regulators and everybody else to come up with what we call, Ajay, I think it's the Africa Energy Compact.
Meanwhile, government institutions were not left out on how to energize Africa, as another line of panelists addressed barriers to achieving energy access goals and the need for sustained reforms in the sector.
But perhaps I think the one thing that strikes me about the energy sector relative to other sectors is the need, as it were, for a lot more energy independence of the sector in terms of how it finances itself, and relying a bit less on the rest of public resources than has been the case in recent years in many of our countries. And I think here there is a lesson to be drawn from, for example, the telecom sector. I think the link which is much stronger in telecom between access and service is a lot weaker in the energy sector. So I think one of the things that our countries have been really effective at in the past has been to invest in generation capacity, but less so at capturing the rate of return in this area by adjusting tariffs. So I would say one of the first things that countries are going to have to look at to improve energy service delivery is a more direct link between investment in the sector and being able to price services accordingly. So I think that's the first thing. And then second, of course, we are cognizant of, in terms of the advice we give to governments, of public resources needing to be invested in energy. I mean, without energy, you don't have development. But again, really for the energy sector to be independent, to be less susceptible to these kind of shocks, and these shocks will be there going forward. One of the first things that has to be done is giving energy sectors a lot more autonomy by making sure that they are able to reap the returns on the investments that they make.
Well, thank you very much. The fiscal impact of the energy sector is so critical to managing our finances, but also our development as a whole. Because we are talking about, at the moment, $1.9 billion of shortfall, energy sector shortfall. And for a commodity which is commercial, like energy services, you cannot be using the budget to finance shortfalls of about 1.9 billion. And that's just about 2% of GDP. That is so much. And this is why we have been pursuing a number of reforms to bring the energy sector to financial sustainability. For example, we have been implementing what we call the Energy Sector Recovery Program since 2019, which is intended to bring the sector to financial sustainability. There's a task force chaired by the Vice President, which is overseeing the implementation of the various reforms. And the measures that we are implementing to strengthen the finances of the sector include IPP renegotiation. We are renegotiating some of the contracts we've signed with the independent power producers so that we can reduce the cost of generation, particularly capacity-related cost. We also are implementing tariff reforms, and I'm sure you have heard of the automatic tariff adjustment, which we are implementing in order to account for inflation, exchange rate, and also changes in the generation mix. At the moment, our generation mix has 30% hydro. Right. The rest is either thermal or renewable energy. Renewable energy at the moment is about 3.2% in the generation mix. And therefore, if you want to be able to address the finances, how much hydro you put into the formula, how much thermal you put into the formula, because the cost varies between hydro and thermal. This can tell how much you can recover through the tariff. Since 2022, the regulator, Public Utilities Regulatory Commission, put in place a multi-year tariff framework that led to increase in tariffs by about 70% since September 2022. But this is to assure investors that we admit there are challenges, but we are also bold as a government to take the necessary bullets in order for us to put the sector in a more sustainable manner so as to address those challenges that investors are usually worried about.
In the beginning, as we set off and create the program, only about 30% of the population had access to electricity. So we started by establishing a new electrification strategy and a master plan, electricity master plan. It's a long-term, taking into consideration a long-term vision, which accounts the investment needs for the whole, the entire value chain. Considering Mozambique energy potential, the electricity master plan also took into account the electricity needs for the region, Southern Africa. As we wanted to reinforce the Mozambican position as an exporter, net exporter of electricity. So, in assuming the critical role of the private sector in both the construction of new large-scale connected to the grid generation facility, power stations, but also the expansion of isolated systems. We also pay attention in the regulation. There was a need to review the regulation to make it more attractive for the investment of private sector.
Yeah.
We had also to involve in the whole process the contribution of our cooperation partners. That was crucial, not only to get benchmark and learning from others, but also their support in designing and also to enable the mobilization of the necessary resources for the implementation of the program.
So in the long term, we are promoting the production of green hydrogen, and we want to establish Mauritania as a hub for production of low carbon energy and of low carbon minerals also, because we have huge resources of iron ore in particular. Let me just start by saying one point, which is the difficult equation in all of this, is cost of electricity. It's very high in Mauritania, it's very high in Africa. On average, in Africa, we pay twice more for our electricity than the producers that produce at the highest cost. In some cases, we pay more than 7 times almost the cost of what a Chinese, for example, will pay for its electricity. And that put our industry completely at disadvantage in terms of competitiveness. So we need to address that. And while this is a productive sector, and in principle there should be no subsidies, we should accept that in the short term we may be in fact obliged to provide some form of subsidies, in particular to the poor and for the remote areas. So this is why we have established in the framework of the law also an electrification fund that will be abundant by both donor contribution and budget contribution to support access of the poor to electricity.
In other words, what underpinned the New Deal on energy? The first was to inspire hope on the resolution of Africa's energy problems. Secondly, we wanted to establish transformative partnerships, such as the one that we are building with the World Bank. We wanted to mobilize adequate domestic and international capital. And fourth, we also wanted to strengthen policies, regulation, and sector governance. And finally, we wanted to increase the bank's lending for energy investments. So that's where, those were the aspirations that we had at the moment. But what we have learned since is that energy access requires to focus on two things: grid-based connections as well as off-grid. And you need to provide equal measure to both of them, which is important because by virtue of the spread of the population on the continent, there are certain areas of the continent that will never be able to be commercially connected to the grid. And therefore, we estimate that at least 50% of new connections by 2030 will be through what we call distributed renewable energy systems, such as solar mini grids and isolated systems. The other lesson that we also learned is that Africa energy sector is very reliant on public sector funding. In this particular case, we found that Africa relies on 34% of its funding from the public sector, which is actually double what obtains in other parts of the world. And therefore, there is a strong need to create an enabling environment for private sector participation in power. And finally, this is all what we also saw, is the need to build our market, our energy market, to be resilient to global shocks, such as COVID-19.
When we return, Nigeria's independent energy company, Seplat, celebrates a decade of dual listing in Lagos and London. We have a bit of that for you after this.
We are done dreaming of an industrialized Africa. No more enduring long journeys in darkness. No more imagining life without constant power. we are done. We are done. Done tolerating 24 hours without power, load shedding, blackouts, and power cuts. Enough. Imagine a life where our abundant natural resources can't power a generation. We can't cope with that reality. 600 million Africans still lack access to power. We have the solution. It's time to turn imagination into action. African Energy Week 2024 is the platform to implement change, sign deals, and take decisive action. And implement. Join us. Invest in African energies. Energy growth through an enabling environment, and be part of the movement that brings hope to millions across the continent. It's not just about power, it's about empowering lives and giving African hope. Be there to witness the transformation. African Energy Week 2024, where imagination becomes reality. Secure your seat now. Don't miss out on African Energy Week 2024. Visit our website and buy your tickets today. Let's light up Africa and create a brighter future together.
Project. That the time you need to build that project. Sign, baby, sign.
This is Energy Frontiers. Seplat Energy, a company listed on both the Lagos and the London stock exchanges, this week marked a decade of its listing since its initial public offering back in 2014. The company boasts of a rich portfolio of oil and gas assets with 7 onshore blocks in the Niger Delta, and says it has ambitious targets in 2024 and beyond. Take a listen.
Well, the journey continues. We put 5 things. There are more than 5. Acquisition of MPU. This is a very big, game-changing acquisition for us, and I know we can do this justice, okay? And I know we can ramp up production and grow and deliver for Nigeria. ANOGAS is one of the 7 critical gas projects. It's the first one to be complete. It will be this year, and that will then bring much-needed value in the east and bringing that gas into the west. We have in Abiala and Siberia, which is in our El Crest OML 40. Abiala, we are actually bringing, which is the marginal field. So the marginal field we picked up, and we're bringing it on production this year in Q3. And Siberia, which was an exploration on OML 40, we've got discovery there. And again, we're going to bring that on for production this year. And the last one is obviously the Sapele gas plant I talked about. So the list is endless. The demands of the board is greater, the demands of Nigeria is greater, but Seplat is really ready to step up.
Namibia is looking to empower the country's energy ambitions through local content. More on that in a moment. The 2024 Namibia Local Content Conference was put together to build local capacity and expertise which are needed by Namibians to thrive in the petroleum industry and ensure that the country's oil and gas discoveries benefit the citizens. Namibia's Petroleum Commissioner, Magishino, who spoke at the 3-day event, emphasized the central local content development and guiding the responsible exploitation of the country's petroleum resources. Here is an excerpt from the minister's opening remarks.
What we are expecting in 2024, this year still, we expect a well to be drilled by Chevron, we expect a well to be drilled by Rhino, and we expect additional appraisal wells that are going to come out of Total and out of Shell. We also expect some wells to be drilled by 2025, and within 2025, we therefore expect most of the work that will be done is the wells that will be drilled by Gulp in terms of their appraisal campaign, and additional well then resulting from the outcome of the wells that will be drilling by the end of the year, and hopefully even ECHO will come on board because they have a prospect that is matured that could possibly be able to reach final investment decision by 2025. So that's the outlook, ladies and gentlemen. It's for the service industry and the service providers to prepare yourself. And this is then where we say, when we ask a question, how do you play in terms of local content? The local content that we are looking for is therefore for you to be able to provide the services that are required to ensure that these activities or this work are done effectively, but with the participation of the local people. So when we speak of the petroleum, or especially the upstream petroleum sector, we're speaking of a sector that is highly specialized. It's a very high-risk industry. It's an industry that requires specific skills. It's an industry that is very, very capital-intensive. And it's also an industry that is technologically driven. With all these elements, for one to be able to participate meaningfully and for you to be able to have that definition of local content, then resulting in tangible results that you can see as Namibian citizens on the ground, you need to ensure that you meet these obligations and these requirements of the petroleum upstream sector. With that being said, we are therefore creating a policy or a tool that need to be governed, that need to be adopted, but it should also then provide a means for us to address these challenges or these inhibitors for one to participate, so that then we make a clear conduit for all to participate and all to benefit. In all, what we want to create an environment where investment thrives, and they thrive by being provided with efficient services that are coming from the ground. In a nutshell, that's what we are aiming at.
Still in Namibia, where the country is set to host the edition of the Namibia International Energy Conference due April 23 to 25 in the country's capital, Windhoek. The three-day high-profile event will bring together government officials, private companies, investors, and thought leaders from across the globe to discuss how to foster industry growth and position Namibia as a prime investment destination. And finally, join the African Energy Chamber and thousands of global energy industry experts at this year's African Energy Week, scheduled for Cape Town, South Africa in November. Go now to the event website and register your seat and corporate exhibitions at www.aecweek.com. And that's the package of Energy Frontiers for you at this time. We appreciate your making the time to watch the show as always. Remember to follow the program on Frontier Africa Reports website, like all the video editions, send in your comments, and subscribe to our YouTube. Follow us as well across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. I am Justina Okechukwu. Bye-bye.